I have gone from being somebody that just wants to keep every single tiny little thing to being somebody that wants to throw everything out and just have a lovely clean slate. Hey folks, it's Finn. Welcome back, lovely people. Lovely to see you, and thank you for tuning in to another video. A word of warning, this is going to be a sweaty video because I'm in the UK, we're in the middle of a heat wave, and we don't know how to cope when it goes above 22 degrees. So I will mostly, in this video, be melting. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here today to talk about decluttering, because lots of you who are part of the Finn fam and the Flock group know that over the last couple of years, I've been having a massive decluttering. And so today, I want to talk about that and talk about the interesting things I've noticed on my decluttering journey that are tied into both mental health and, surprisingly, my gender transition. But before we get stuck into that, if you are tuning in for the very first time today, welcome to the Finn fam. Do make sure to click subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you don't miss out all of the regular Finn installments. So let's talk decluttering. So I am somebody that hoards stuff. I am really bad at seeing things and thinking, I'll just keep that in case I need it later. So far, I've never needed it. Any of my friends who have ever helped me to move home shudder at the thought of ever being asked because they know how much stuff I have. Sorry to all my friends. This has only been really a most recent kind of 10-year thing where I've just developed this huge collection of camping equipment, stuffed sheep, books, DVDs, basically anything. I have a Velcro brain at the best of times, and this has a big problem on lots of areas of my life, but when it comes to things, I suddenly get like a connection to something and then want to collect lots of it, and it's just unmanageable. This all came to a head for me a couple of years ago after Mum died, and I moved in with Chris, and Chris was yet another person who said, "How much stuff do you have, Finn?" And I decided enough was enough. I was going to start decluttering. And a friend of mine told me about the Marie Kondo method, KonMari method. And this all stems from a book that Marie Kondo wrote called The Magic Art of Tidying Up. And I'll put links to that in the description, and everything else I talk about in this video, links will always be at the bottom. Now, the KonMari method, in a nutshell, is basically about paying attention to every single thing you own and spending time with it and asking if it sparks joy. Which might sound a bit woolly, but bear with me. Her book goes into much more detail, and what it allowed me to do was to start really reflecting on the things I was hanging on to and why. And then I had one of my massive realizations. Now, I did write a blog about this at the time, and I'll link that below as well, but I basically realized that I'd only become a hoarder in the last 10 years. Now, 10 years ago, I got clean and sober. And when I very first began my recovery, I owned pretty much a rucksack and a suitcase. That was it. Because part of my addiction was to travel around, because I used to move around a lot to try and escape myself and my problems. And then in recovery, I began to settle. I had a flat for the first time, and bills, and all of that sensible grown-up adult stuff I'd never had before. And so in building a home, I started to fill it with books, DVDs, CDs, camping equipment. And this is where my hoarding began. And this is where my realization came in. I realized that for me, these things that I'd been buying were a symbol of my recovery. That every time I looked around my room, it was telling me that I was successful in my recovery, because I couldn't just up and move with the amount of stuff I had. So it was kind of a way of like really grounding me in the here and now, in the recovery that I was in, because I owned all this stuff for the first time. And I think I was hanging on to it in a way of kind of keeping my recovery, that if I owned all these things, this life that I'd built up that was actually physical and tangible in the things I could touch around my home, kind of anchored me to my recovery. Does that make sense? And once I realised this, my relationship to my things began to change. And I began to realise that I don't need my things to anchor me in recovery. My recovery is mine. It's so solid now at 10 years that I didn't need all the things around me. And this helped me to start my decluttering mission. And I started, as the Marie Kondo method suggests, with the kind of bigger practical stuff, the easier stuff. So I started to downsize all my camping stuff, my books, my CDs. But then I got to the more difficult stuff. The memories, trinkets, toys, gifts, letters. Now this stuff's much, much harder to let go of. You know, I collect letters from years ago, postcards from years ago, cards from every birthday, everything that's ever happened. I've got boxes and boxes of memory stuff. Or I did have. Yes, we'll get to that in a minute. So that's where I stuck. I managed to downsize a lot and get rid of a lot. But then I started to pick up and read some of the letters and the old cards and things from my travelling days. And then I just couldn't do any more. And I stopped. And I just kind of put to one side any idea of decluttering. I'd done enough to make a difference, and there I stopped. But then we decided to move home. And yes, moving has been a really good way for me to pick this back up again. You see, the trouble is with me, the last couple of times I've moved, I've had to move in a real hurry. When me and my ex-partner split up and I moved from Oxford to Devon, I pretty much just grabbed everything as quickly as I could and moved. And then when Mum got poorly, I had to move really quickly from Devon back to Eastbourne. So I didn't sort through stuff, I just quickly packed it and moved it. And then when Mum died and I moved in with Chris, I quickly packed everything and just moved. So I had all of this quickly packed stuff that I'd not really paid any attention to. And with Mum dying, there was all these memories wrapped up in it. And I think that was why I was so stuck. And then when it came to us deciding to move back to Devon, as we did 6 weeks ago now, we had a month's notice. So Chris got a job and told he'd start in a month. And I decided then that I was going to use that month to really slowly go through everything so that this time when I moved, I wouldn't be bringing my clutter with me. It would be going. And I have loved that process. It was so much easier to do like this because the trouble is when you're trying to declutter, it's like, where do you put it all in the meantime and all of this? But in doing it in moving, it was kind of easier because I could go through some things, get rid of what I didn't need and then pack ready to move. And I suddenly found it was easier. And I was finding I could go through some of the memory stuff and I could quite easily look at it and go, why am I keeping that? I had a flag from the Torridon Hotel that I worked in years ago that everyone had signed in my birth name, and I was keeping that. Why? So the whole process this time was so much quicker. I ended up just keeping a few key little memory things, and I've got rid of so many CDs, DVDs, books. I've really downsized. I mean, you saw my books in my old place. It was much more full than this. They're spread out between just 3 bookcases now, and there's hardly anything here. It's quite amazing. And I think the reason I found it easier this time was because I had the time, but also because after having that period of stuckness where I couldn't move anything, I was in grief and I needed to go through that grieving process first before I could do it. And I think this whole thing about reading the Marie Kondo book and really kind of reflecting on my things and my relationship to them needed some time to really kind of like just make sense, because, you know, everything is connected with us, isn't it? Everything we go through is connected. So these last few years have been bizarre for me because Mum died at the end of my gender transition. So I haven't really yet processed the end of my gender transition. I was still kind of starting on processing that when Mum died. So you all know that I've had this counselling over the last couple of years to make sense of a lot of things. And I think the decluttering, the grieving for Mum, and the kind of processing the end of my transition was all kind of rolled together. How often have you heard me speak about this ball of string thing over the last couple of years that I've been unknotting? And this makes sense for me. It makes sense that I needed to go through all of that process because a lot of this stuff wasn't just stuff, it had meaning. Like my books and CDs and DVDs meant solid recovery, grown-upness, and my memories were so important because that was my mum. But do you know what I also realised when I was tidying up that was tied into my gender transition was that all of my books and CDs and DVDs and everything else actually was about painting on my personality. And what I mean by that is growing up, I didn't really have a clue who I was. The reason for that I now know is because I was transgender and I didn't realise. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which makes sense because my personality didn't develop properly. And over my transition, I've been finding out who I am and really settling into myself, being confident about who I am, knowing my personality. And it suddenly struck me how much easier I could just let go of things because I didn't need them to prop up who I am anymore. I'm so confident in who I am, the man I am, the person I am, that I don't need these things anymore as a kind of symbol of myself. Does that make sense? So people would come round and they'd be able to tell who I was by the things around me. And in some ways this is something that we all do. But I think I was doing this more because I still didn't really know who I was. But now I don't need something to display who I am because I display who I am because at last I know who I am. This is turning into one of those Finn waffles, isn't it? So yeah, I just really wanted to share that today because lots of people have asked, because I've been talking about this on and off the last couple of years. So I really wanted to just share this process that I've gone through where I really have moved from somebody that desperately clung on to things and not really knowing why, to now somebody that's really enjoying getting rid of things and finding the difference between something I really want to keep because it does spark joy and it does serve me. Like every book I've kept now serves me. There are books that I will reread that make a difference to me. The CDs I've kept do the same thing. There's still some downsizing there to be done. The DVDs are my most important films, and I'm sure as I settle into this new flat and unpack more, that more's going to end up going because I've got more of a drive now to let go of things than I have to keep things. But that took deep work. I don't think that you can just go, right, I'm going to declutter. I'm going to go from somebody that hoards everything to letting stuff go. I think we have to give it time to kind of percolate in ourselves, and I think we need help with that. So if you are struggling to declutter, I think it's worth asking, what is it that these things are symbolising for me? What is it that they're making up for that I feel that I'm missing? And I think once you then find out what you're missing, what you're making up for, then it'll be easier to let go. At least that's been my experience. That was a waffle. So there you go. Lots of you have been asking me to share about this process, and I don't know if that made any sense. Hopefully it did. But hey, at least you get to see me again because I have been a little bit missing of late in this move, and I'm still experimenting with where things are going, as you can see. At the moment, this is my temporary backdrop until we re-put up the gratitude wall and I work out where my office is going. So it's a work in progress, like the beautiful people that we all are. Yep, the cheese remains. If this video did make sense and it has been helpful in any way, please do let me know in the comment section below. And besides, it's always nice to chat and get to know you. Thanks for watching, folks. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next week.